6 NATO warships are gone, not damaged, not retreating, gone, swallowed by the Persian Gulf in under 30 minutes. And the weapon that did it, Iran built it from scratch, under sanctions, while the West laughed and called it impossible. This is not a drill. This is not a provocation. This is the moment the global order breaks. Tonight, the Strait of Hormuz, the 33-kilometer choke point through which 17 million barrels of oil move every single day, has been closed. Not temporarily, not diplomatically, militarily, by force. By 200 Qadir anti-ship cruise missiles that turned 6 of NATO's finest warships into burning wreckage on the floor of the Persian Gulf. And right now, in Washington, in London, in Berlin, in Paris, men in suits are sitting in crisis rooms staring at operational data that none of their planning frameworks prepared them for. Because what happened in the Strait of Hormuz last night wasn't supposed to be possible. They were wrong. And thousands of sailors paid for that arrogance. Let's get into exactly what happened, how Iran pulled this off, what this weapon actually is, and what it means for every single person watching this, because the consequences don't stop at the Persian Gulf. They end up in your gas tank, your grocery bill, your government's ability to keep the lights on. Stay with me, because this is the one they don't want explained clearly. The NATO deployment to the Strait of Hormuz was political theater. 6 warships sent into the most dangerous stretch of water on the planet to send a message to Tehran, a show of collective resolve, a demonstration that this wasn't just America anymore. This was the full alliance, united, committed, unshakable. It was a trap. And Iran had already built it before the ships arrived. Months before the first missile was fired, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps planners were doing one thing: watching. Every NATO vessel that entered the Gulf operational area was tracked the moment it arrived. Radar emission signatures logged, communication patterns studied, formation geometry mapped, distance from American air bases calculated at every point in the patrol cycle. They weren't watching out of curiosity. They were building a targeting solution. The operational window Iran selected wasn't random. It was the precise moment when those 6 vessels were at maximum vulnerability, spread across a geographic area that made it impossible for any single ship's defense systems to help the others. At the furthest point in their cycle from US air bases that could have scrambled interceptors in time. The ships weren't just in the wrong place. They were in exactly the position Iranian planners had spent months engineering them into without those commanders ever realizing it. When the launch order came, 200 Qadir missiles left their tubes from 3 separate platform types simultaneously. Fixed coastal battery positions along the northern and eastern coastline fired the first wave, pre-surveyed, preloaded, targets already locked. Mobile coastal defense units that had moved into position overnight under complete electromagnetic silence fired the second wave from ridgeline positions with no electronic signature the NATO vessels could have detected. Iranian naval fast attack boats and corvettes, concealed inside the dense civilian maritime traffic of the strait itself, fired the third wave from inside the defensive envelope. At angles the ship's systems were least positioned to cover. 200 missiles, 3 vectors, 1 coordinated sequence engineered for a single outcome: saturation. The first subsalvo didn't go for the hull. It went for the eyes, radar arrays, electronic warfare systems, missile launcher mechanisms, the defensive architecture that would have engaged everything that followed. Those initial impacts didn't sink the ships. They blinded and disabled them. They consumed interceptors. They overloaded fire control processing. And while those systems were burning, the main attack waves were already inside the defensive perimeter, closing at speeds the degraded systems couldn't respond to. Every ship took multiple warhead hits. Every ship went to the bottom. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 minutes. 6 NATO warships, 0 survivors of the vessels themselves, and the Qadir missiles were already returning to their reload cycle before the fires on the water had stopped burning. The Qadir missile is not an accident. It is the product of a 20-year developmental program executed with the kind of disciplined strategic patience that Western defense establishments genuinely did not believe Iran was capable of sustaining. It starts in the 1990s. Iran acquires Chinese C-801 and C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles, studies them, reverses their architecture, begins building an indigenous program that starts from those foundations and progressively leaves them behind. Each generation of Iranian anti-ship missile development improved on the last. Range, guidance sophistication, warhead lethality, electronic countermeasure resistance. The Qadir in its current production form is not a copy of anything. It is the accumulated output of Iranian engineering across 2 decades of focused developmental work. Range, approximately 300 kilometers, enough to engage any target in the Strait of Hormuz and its approaches from launch positions deep inside Iranian territory, well beyond the reach of any weapon the NATO vessels could have fired back. That range is not a coincidence. It is a deliberate design parameter. The operational requirement was simple: be able to destroy Western warships in the Gulf without ever exposing the launch platform to counterfire. The Kadir was built to that specification from the beginning. The guidance system runs in 3 phases: inertial navigation for the initial flight phase, no radar emissions, nothing for the target to detect; GPS updating through the mid-course phase for precision maintenance. Then, in the terminal phase, an active radar seeker that acquires the target autonomously, tracks it through evasive maneuvers, and makes corrections that compensate for jamming and defensive countermeasures. That terminal seeker is what makes the Qadir genuinely dangerous in a way that previous Iranian systems were not. It can discriminate between vessel types. It can prioritize targets based on pre-programmed engagement logic. It operates in frequency-agile modes that make sustained electronic jamming technically difficult. And it has a home-on jam mode, meaning if a NATO vessel activated its electronic countermeasures against an incoming Qadir, it may have been giving the missile additional targeting information instead of defeating it. The flight profile in terminal approach is sea skimming. Altitude, a few meters above the water surface in the final kilometers before impact. At that altitude, the radar horizon, the geometric limit of what shipboard radar can detect, collapses. A Qadir crossing the radar horizon at sea skimming altitude gives a defending vessel seconds to respond, not minutes, seconds. Modern naval missile defense is built around minutes. The warhead itself is semi-armor piercing with a delayed fuse. It penetrates the hull before detonating in the interior spaces: machinery rooms, magazine areas, fuel storage. The locations where a single detonation causes catastrophic, irreversible damage. Ships don't just get hit. They get hollowed out from the inside. 200 of these missiles, in a coordinated sequence, against 6 vessels whose defensive systems had been suppressed before the main attack arrived. The outcome was never going to be anything other than what it was. In every NATO capital right now, the same conversation is happening, and it is going nowhere. The options available to the alliance suffer from a single structural problem. Every response that is militarily significant enough to change the situation carries escalatory implications that the alliance cannot build internal consensus around. And every response that the alliance can agree on is too limited to change anything on the water. A coordinated NATO air campaign against Iranian missile infrastructure would be the most meaningful military response. It would also require unanimous alliance-wide political agreement that does not exist, cannot be generated quickly, and would not hold under the domestic political pressures that member state governments are already facing. German public opinion on military action in the Persian Gulf, French institutional instincts about strategic autonomy, the different energy exposure levels across member states who are all now looking at energy import costs that are repricing in real time. These are not small obstacles. They are coalition fracturing forces operating simultaneously. And underneath all of it is the energy mathematics that makes the political calculus even worse. European member states are the most economically exposed to what has just happened in the Strait of Hormuz. Their industrial economies run on Gulf energy at price assumptions that a sustained supply disruption will shatter. The governments facing the sharpest domestic political pressure over the loss of their sailors are the same governments facing the most severe economic consequences from the closure of Hormuz. Forceful military escalation and cautious de-escalation are simultaneously politically impossible for the same governments at the same moment. Iran designed this. The Qadir engagement did not just destroy 6 warships. It constructed a political trap around the entire alliance simultaneously with the military strike. The strategic value of what happened last night extends far beyond the ships on the bottom of the Gulf. It extends into the internal fractures it has exposed inside NATO itself. Fractures that every adversary of the Western-led order is watching carefully and will exploit methodically. Forget the warships for a moment. 17 million barrels of oil transit the Strait of Hormuz every single day. That petroleum moves through that channel into the global supply chain that manufactures your products, grows your food, runs your supply chains, and sets your energy prices. The strait has just been militarily closed to Western naval power by a country that has demonstrated it can reclose it at the operational cost of 200 missiles it can rebuild. The global energy market is already repricing, not just for this crisis, permanently. Every energy market participant on the planet now knows what the risk profile of Gulf dependence actually is. Insurance premiums for Gulf supply don't go back to where they were. Investment decisions that have been calibrated around cheap, reliable Gulf petroleum get re-evaluated in every boardroom and every government ministry that depends on that supply. The acceleration of the global energy transition that follows from this, the investment in renewables, in storage, in supply chain diversification, that is the most consequential long-term consequence of what happened last night. It will reshape global infrastructure across the next decade. China is in the most strategically complex position of any external actor. As the world's largest energy importer, Beijing faces the most severe immediate economic exposure to Hormuz's closure. As Iran's most significant strategic and economic partner, Beijing possesses more direct access to Iranian decision-making than any other outside power. That combination makes China the indispensable mediator in whatever resolution eventually emerges, and the regional influence China acquires through successful mediation will be more durable than anything a military operation could have produced. Russia benefits. Energy revenue increases as supply disruption drives global prices up. Western strategic attention and resources are pulled toward a new crisis theater, and the operational validation of anti-ship cruise missile capability that the Qadir engagement has provided is already generating renewed interest in Russian naval strike systems from regional actors who watched last night's engagement very carefully. The persistent Western underestimation of Iranian military capability is not a random analytical failure. It is the systematic product of an assumption that has never been adequately challenged. The assumption, a nation under comprehensive economic sanctions, denied access to advanced foreign technology, cannot develop and sustain military capabilities of the first order. Iran is the case that refutes this, and it refutes it because the mechanism Iran used is different from the mechanism the assumption is built around. Most nations convert economic resources into military capability by purchasing it. Foreign weapons, foreign expertise, foreign defense industrial capacity. Sanctions were designed to interdict that conversion mechanism, and they did. Iran couldn't buy its way to military capability, so Iran built it. Indigenous development, slower, more expensive per unit, more technically demanding, but it produces something foreign acquisition never provides: complete ownership, complete understanding, complete operational control of the capability. Iranian engineers who designed the Kadir understand it at every level of its technical architecture. When Western intelligence assessed the threat it posed, that assessment was built from the outside, from observable external characteristics and inferred internal parameters. The gap between what the assessment concluded and what last night demonstrated is the gap between observed capability and actual capability. The Qadir was not purchased, it was created. And tonight it did exactly what it was designed to do. 6 NATO warships are on the floor of the Persian Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed to Western naval power by a weapon Iran built under sanctions, while being told it was beyond their reach. The global energy system is repricing itself against a new permanent risk landscape. The most powerful military alliance in history is an internal crisis without a coherent response strategy, without the internal consensus to build one, and without the time the political environment is going to allow. The assumption that Western naval power could operate in Iran's strategic domain without Iranian permission, that assumption is gone. It went down with the ships. The world that existed before 200 Qadir missiles were fired does not exist anymore. What comes next will be shaped by who has the strategic vision and the genuine national conviction to define the terms of what replaces it. Iran has made its position clear. The question now is whether the alliance that just lost 6 warships in 30 minutes has the clarity to understand what it's actually facing. Drop your analysis in the comments. Share this if it said what the institutional media won't. Subscribe because the next development is already moving. Stay sharp.